Hello, welcome to the Nature's Nexus podcast. Here, we're all about connecting anyone and everyone with our environment. We'll aim to do this through sharing knowledge and discussing various topics that show people how they can be better connected to nature and the world we live in. At the end of each episode, we'll also provide some actionable steps that anybody can take to help make our world a better place. I believe that the impact of everyday people can be profound if we all act and strive to leave the world in a better way than we found it, especially our environment. I'd love anyone and everyone to be able to listen and enjoy tuning in. I hope we can be the nexus between you and the beautiful world we live in and so rely on. This is Jessica York bringing you another episode of Nature's Nexus. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Nature's Nexus podcast. Today's guest is Dr Peggy Rismiller. Hello and welcome, Peggy.
Hello, it's great to be with you today.
Thanks, Peggy. It's great to have you here. Before we get into the podcast episode and the questions and I introduce you to all the listeners, I like to ask all of our guests the same two questions at the start because I love to see what everybody says. So if you're ready, I'll get into it and start with those two questions.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is, what is it do you love most about our natural world?
Oh, what do I love about the natural world? Being in it every day, getting out and, and looking at the sky and listening to the birds. And yes, I just, I can't imagine not being able to walk outside into nature every day.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. It's lovely. Some people are real outdoorsy people. They just love being outside all the time. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. No, I am a bit like that myself. I have to get my dose of outdoors. I couldn't imagine being inside all the time away from nature and everything.
I couldn't do
Lovely.
that.
Yeah. Okay, and the second one is, how do you get connected to nature, or when do you feel the most connected to nature?
I get connected to nature by going out into nature every day and get connected through my research, through life, going out and having radio tracked echidnas for over 35 years, that takes me into nature and takes me into another world, actually. And it's been part of my life for the last over 35 years. So I feel connected every day.
Yeah, for sure. Your work's definitely the line of work where you're literally just out amongst it all the time. So, for everybody who doesn't know Peggy, Peggy is a wildlife biologist who has dedicated more than 3 decades of studying one of Australia's most fascinating and mysterious little animals, which is the short-beaked echidna. Originally from the United States, Peggy moved to Kangaroo Island in South Australia, where she co-founded the Pelican Lagoon Research and Wildlife Centre and began what would become some of the world's longest-running research on wild echidnas. Her groundbreaking work has revealed remarkable insights into echidna behaviour, reproduction, and ecology, helping scientists better understand an animal that was once considered one of Australia's least studied mammals. In recognition of her contribution to wildlife research and conservation, Peggy was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia, or OAM, which recognises Australian citizens and other persons for outstanding achievement and service. That's quite remarkable, Peggy. Well done.
Thank you.
Also, while Peggy is best known for her work with echidnas, her research interests extend more broadly across Australian wildlife, including studies of goannas and tiger snakes on Kangaroo Island. So, through decades of field observation and research, Peggy has developed a deep understanding of the complex relationships between animals and the environments they inhabit. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the secret lives of echidnas, what decades of patient observation have taught Peggy about these extraordinary animals, and why there is still so much we don't know about one of Australia's most iconic species. So, Peggy, out of all the animals in the world, what was it about the echidna that captured your attention and kept it for more than 35 years?
Well, I always say I didn't start out to work with echidnas, but echidnas found me. So it was a conundrum because I was in Germany. I did my master's and PhD in Germany, working with European green lizards, and I wanted to come to Australia because there were bigger reptiles. And when I started applying for postdoctoral grants in Australia, and I met a researcher from the University of Adelaide, they said, "Oh yeah, plenty, no problems with reptiles in Australia." But when I finally was offered a postdoctoral grant, then it was, okay, you cannot have a full postdoctoral grant to work with reptiles. So I was offered half a grant to work with tiger snakes and half a grant to work with echidnas. And I thought, okay, I never thought I'd work with a mammal, but that's weird enough. I have a mammal that lays an egg, and I have a snake that gives live birth. So that's what brought me to Kangaroo Island. And then just things started happening. And yeah, and 35 plus years later, I'm still here learning.
Was just meant to be, hey?
It was meant to be, yes.
Yeah.
My first echidna, when I saw that first echidna, the only echidna I had seen before I came to Australia was in the Frankfurt Zoo. So, yes, I had seen an echidna, knew very little about them, um, didn't realize how little was actually known about them. And, it wasn't until I came and started working with my partner with tiger snakes, and it was time to get out and look for echidnas, and he knew this echidna on the property for many years. We called her Big Mama because
Mm.
she was a big mama. But the first time that I got in the field with a wild echidna and it started doing its thing, and um, even when they have, even if they look at you, if they just give you that glance, there's something about them. And it was like, oh no, I can see it. I am drawn in.
Mhm.
This is going to be it. I'm going to have to learn more about these animals.
Yeah. I can certainly understand that feeling. I know whenever I've run into echidnas out doing field work or just, being out and about, and I think they're the most lovely little animals because they're one of the few animals that you can encounter relatively safely in the wild, and they're not out to hurt you and you're not out to hurt them, obviously. And it's a really nice moment when you see one and they don't really mind people too much. They just carry on with their business. Or I've noticed if you get a bit close, they sort of freeze. So I always find it so lovely running into an echidna. So they make my day.
I think they make everybody's day, and they are very, very individualistic. I mean, from all the echidnas I've known, they do all react differently to interactions with people. Some of them do run away. Some of them
Mm.
dig in and won't move for hours. Others put their head down and pretend I'm not here. I'm not here. Others think, after a minute they look around and say, "What the heck?" They get on with their business. And I've even seen them come around and stick their beak into volunteers' shoes just to
Oh,
smell what
really?
was there.
That's so funny. I've never had one be that brave and approach me like that before.
Every time you see an echidna, you don't know what it's going to do.
I know. I feel like now I'm going to be on the lookout for one that's going to be brave enough to come up to me and have a sniff. I remember the latest encounter I had, I think it was only last year. It wasn't too long ago. And I was out doing field work and I heard this rustling like behind me very close. And I was like, oh no, don't tell me it's a snake. But I turned around and it was an echidna. And I was so delighted. I was like, oh, nice echidna. And then I stopped my work for about 10 or 15 minutes and I just stood there and then I ended up sitting down just watching this echidna and just watching it rambling through. It was just foraging. It was in no hurry and it wasn't trying to get away from me. And sometimes when it came a bit closer or if I took a step closer, it would sort of just freeze for about maybe a minute and then it would keep going about its way. And it was so cool having that little, sort of like an interaction, not really for me, but just watching it. And you could hear like all the little snuffly sounds it makes and watching it forage. And yeah, it was really lovely. And just seeing it so close, like being so close to this calm wild animal, yeah, it was awesome. And then I just watched him walk off into the bush.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they are definitely awesome, and anyone who gets to have that type of experience, I think, can really feel, how special this weird little animal is that, that only occurs here in Australia and Papua New Guinea. And what I like people to remember, if they don't know, when they see an echidna, they're looking at one of the planet's longest surviving mammals in the world. And so you're looking at a creature whose ancestors were around 130 million years ago. And that in itself is so incredible. And and then when you get to see this, they basically, you're right. They don't do any harm. Yes, they eat invertebrates, but other than that, they don't do any harm. In fact, they're very good. They're cultivators, and in our ecosystems, they're important to be out there. It means that we have healthy habitats, and yeah, they're just a joy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome, and it's crazy to think how old they are, that they evolved so long ago and they're still around and haven't changed much. So
Yeah.
what makes them so unique compared to other mammals?
Ah.
Mm.
Well, they have quite a few very unique traits. First of all, they do not sweat. A lot of people think, and they don't sweat or pant. Okay, so they have no sweat glands, which is a bit unusual. They have, as a mammal, they have no teat or nipples, but they will have a milk patch. They have a very low operative body temperature. So their active body temperature is only 31 to 33 degrees. they have the ability to use what we call torpor so that whenever they rest, they passively let their body temperature go down, which means they have respiration, heart rate, um, metabolism, everything slowing down, so they save energy. So, a great thing for a survivor. Of course, they have the spines, and the spines are modified hairs. And of course, the thing that most people know about echidnas is that they lay an egg, and they will only lay one single egg. And once a female is reproductively active, that takes, maybe 8 years before they're sexually mature. She may only breed once every 3 years. So that's why we don't have echidnas all over the place. But that's why they're very, very special. They're very, very old. And they have a lot of unique features.
Yeah. Wow. So if they're reproducing only once every few years and it takes them about 8 years before the female lays their first egg, how long are they then actively reproducing for? Do they live up until they're 20 or 15 or do we know this?
That's a good question. In the wild, they will live for 50 years. And
50?
we know that, yeah, 50,
Wow.
50. For a small mammal, they live quite long.
Mm.
The longest known captive echidna was in the San Diego Zoo, and his name was Victor. Victor died when he was 57 years old, and no one knows how old he was when he actually came into the zoo.
Wow.
So, yes, they are very long lived. And we have animals like Big Mama who are at least 45 and they're still reproductively active.
Yeah. And that is, I think one of the most fascinating things about echidnas is, I don't know, for a lot of people who know about mammals, the fact they lay an egg is very bizarre. Because obviously mammals are known for giving birth to live young and then nourishing them through milk, which the echidna does, you said, through the milk patch. But the egg laying is interesting, and that makes them one of the monotremes in Australia, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So monotremes, there's only 3 monotremes, long-beaked echidna, which is now only in Papua New Guinea, short-beaked echidna, which is known as Australia's most common native mammal, not because there's lots of them, but because they live in every type of habitat. And then, of course, the platypus, which is only living in waterways. So even though platypus and echidnas are similar that they're egg-laying mammals, they're different in many, many different ways.
Yeah. So is there one thing about echidnas that we haven't said already that most Australians might be shocked or surprised to learn? Or do you think it's that evolutionary fact that they've been around for so long?
I think a lot of people don't realize, well, echidnas are seasonal breeders, so they only breed in the wintertime. And being seasonal breeders, if an echidna doesn't need something, they let it regress. So the testes of the males, for example, are pea size in the summertime, and come wintertime, they're golf ball size. But you're never going to see it because they're internal. And the females, which I think is really cool, if the female is not lactating, then the mammary glands regress to microscopic tissue. Like you can't even see it. And
Wow.
it's not until she breeds, and she only will breed with one male. She breeds with one male. She's not going to lay the egg until 22 days later. And during that time, the mammary glands start to swell. And if anyone knows what a mammary gland looks like, they look like a normal mammalian mammary gland with all of the little tubes in it and everything. So I think that is one of the most amazing features. They don't need something, they let it regress. But it's the mammary gland swelling on the echidna that forms that pseudo pouch because she does not have a permanent pouch,
Oh, so
which
the
again
pseudo
is pretty
pouch
weird.
is a gland, essentially.
Well, no, the pseudopouch is the mammary glands swell,
Mm,
and then there's this thick muscle on the echidna. It's very thick on the back that the spines go through. That's why they can move the spines,
mm.
and it gets thinner towards the belly side. And if it's that muscle plus the swelling of the mammary glands that pulls together to form a pseudopouch, but it's not a pouch that actually closes like on a kangaroo.
I
So it
see.
only has a tiny little pocket at the bottom where can she can actually sort of sit on her butt and extend the cloaca and actually deposit that single egg directly into this pseudo pouch.
Mm. It's just all designed perfectly, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
I would say if you've been around for 120 million years, you know how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd think you would have evolved to learn by or evolved to be able to do it by then. So earlier we sort of said, when you first came across echidnas, there wasn't a lot of research and there wasn't a lot known about them. So there was quite a large knowledge gap when you first started researching echidnas. Can you tell
It
us
was
more about?
huge.
Yeah, can you tell us more about this knowledge gap? And for an animal, it's so so well recognized across Australia. Most people in Australia know what an echidna is. What were some of the fundamental things that we didn't know when you were starting out?
Well, of course, when I came in 1988, and I knew that I'd be working with echidnas, and I was working with someone who wanted to measure the respiration of the echidna egg. All right. So it's like one of my first jobs, go and find an echidna with an egg in the pouch. Well, what was known, it was already known that they lay eggs in the winter. All right. So they knew, okay, everything's happening in the winter time. But looking into the literature to find out what I could learn, I found out that there was a whole lot of things we didn't know. So there was a paper written in 1836, and that was Richard Owen, and he had said, "I've looked at all these dead animals being sent to the UK, and we can describe a lot of things, but there's still a lot of things we do not know, and they were especially about reproduction." And so he had 7 basic questions about reproduction. At that time, they didn't even know that they laid an egg. So this was 1836. Didn't know they laid an egg. So they had basically no idea um, how she had the young, how the young was nourished, when they were sexually mature, how often they bred, just all these questions. So then a couple other questions were added in the 1880s. So when I arrived in 1988, all these, dead animals had gone to the UK in 1836, and Richard Owen then said, "We've learned everything we can from these dead animals, but there's really a lot of questions about their reproduction that are unknown." So he had 7 basic questions about reproduction, and at that time, it was still unknown that they even laid an egg, that they were an egg-laying mammal. So during his time, and then in the 1880s later, there were 2 more questions added, and all of them about reproduction, about, how does the female mate? When does she mate? How is the young born? What is the size of the young? How does she nurse the young? When are they sexually mature? All of that was unknown. So in 1988, when I arrived, from 9 questions about reproduction, only 2 had been answered.
Well,
So
yeah.
big, big gap in knowledge. So it was, of course, with technology using radio tracking that we were able these last 35 years to answer all those questions and add more. But for me, I think it's really exciting. Kangaroo Island's sort of role in echidnas. Um, it was on Kangaroo Island that a pair of echidnas was taken to the South Australian Museum in 1884. And the acting director of the South Australian Museum wanted to be the first European to ever see a baby echidna.
Oh,
So, in science, there's a lot of serendipity happen. So they kept these echidnas in in the South Australian Museum for a certain amount of time, unfortunately, not great records, and after a time, they went back to open up these echidnas, hopefully to find a baby echidna. But he did not find a baby echidna. He took this egg out of this pseudo pouch and was gobsmacked, totally, "Wow, this is an egg, this is a mammal, how can this be?"
yeah.
And he was so enthralled and amazed at finding it, and because echidna's eggs are sort of soft and pliable, he squished
Oh,
it.
no.
So
If he'd just been a bit more patient, it would've eventually he would have had the baby. Oh,
well, it
dear.
was at least it was then publicized, and we knew that echidnas were egg-laying mammals, and I think,
Yeah.
that actually happened because of echidna from Kangaroo Island. For me, that's pretty, special and exciting.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
here I was in 1988, and I'm supposed to go out and find an echidna with an egg in the pouch, and yet from the literature, no European had ever even seen echidnas mating,
Wow.
let alone to know, if they've mated, how long is it going to be till she,
Yeah.
lays the egg, and how is she going to do it, and where is she going to do it?
Yeah.
There was a lot of assumptions made that because echidnas and platypus are the only egg-laying mammals, that echidnas were going to be more like platypus.
Mm.
And believe it or not, there was more knowledge about platypus than there were about echidnas.
Yeah. Did
And
that
that was
make you
because,
that was
well,
because
platypus used to be hunted for their fur.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that's why there was more known about platypus than echidnas.
Yeah.
So there was a lot to learn.
Yeah, did
And,
that ever make you feel like, "I'm never going to figure these animals out?"
well, Okay, it was my first winter that going out with a group of volunteers, putting transmitters on as many echidnas as we could, knowing that, okay, that there's going to be a group of males probably following this female. So we were able to actually, myself, some volunteers, were able to actually see echidnas mating for the first time.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
as Europeans. And so
Mm.
that was one of the first records, scientific records in Scientific American about echidnas mating. So it wasn't that successful that winter in finding echidnas with an egg in the pouch because we didn't know what she was going to do. The assumption was, okay, if we saw them mating, how long do we have to wait? No idea. But if they were like platypus, they would bury themselves in someplace. And a platypus will go into a burrow and she'll stay there for a long time because eventually she'll lay the eggs because she has two. She incubates them, she stays with the young, and eventually she comes out.
Mhm,
So it was assumed that echidnas would be the same.
mhm.
But so we saw a couple of echidnas dig in. How long do we wait? We didn't know. We
Yeah.
would dig some up and hopefully find a female with an egg. I think it did happen once, but that was it. So everyone was leaving. This was 2 months later after all the breeding and things were happening, and we had seen other animals with transmitters, but we didn't see them mating. And we had a couple females. And it's like, okay, what the heck? Before we take the transmitter off, let me just do what I said my pouch check. So I had a way that I would feel on the belly to see if anything was different. So Mike and I were there was this one female who we radio tracked every day, did not see her breed. She was coming, going, went through Rocky River. She was in the water. She was in and out. She was active.
Mhm.
So okay, taking off the transmitter, and I said, just a minute, let me just feel. Dun, dun, dun. And I said, oh no, no, something doesn't feel right. Something's different. And so Mike and I unrolled this female,
Mm.
and there was the eggshell, and there was this tiny little blob thing that had just emerged. And that's
Wow.
probably what stuck me here now for the next 30 some years because it was like, oh my, what else has been assumed? What else don't we know?
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the big start.
Yeah.
That was the light bulb moment where you're
Yeah.
going,
Yeah,
yes,
wow. Yeah, so you found a young in the pouch that had just hatched straight out of the egg and then just stayed in the pouch there.
that's
Yeah,
right.
and through all that terrain and all the adventuring she was going on, it was safely tucked in the whole time.
Yes. It was see, obviously, she was out carrying the egg,
Mm.
she wasn't having any problems, going here, there, and everywhere, carrying the egg, and then it hatched, which is about 10 days that the egg is in the pouch before it hatches.
Yeah.
And it was just the most incredible thing, so, then quickly, pack her up, be careful, take her back, call up my mentor, which was Mervyn Griffiths.
Mm.
So, I call him godfather of monotreme biology. So, he wrote The Biology of Monotremes, of course, and he wrote a book called Echidnas, um, back around 1950, I guess? And the other book was in the 1970s, yeah. So he was still alive, Merv, my mentor, and so I called him up and said, "Merv, we've got this hatchling." And the only other photograph ever of a hatchling echidna, I mean, like,
Mm.
just a hatchling, is in his book, and he said, "Whatever you do, be very careful." And it's like, "Yeah, right, be very careful. What do you mean?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, they're
Yeah.
very fragile. We know very little about them.
Mm.
So, you're gonna be the first person to find out about growth, blah, 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 just and so that was the beginning. That was
Yeah.
the beginning, and it was like, "Okay, now we've just got to find out more."
Yeah, wow. That would have been such a memorable moment for you. And how special having the godfather of monotremes as your mentor. That's perfect, isn't it? Do you think
Yes.
that was your most memorable moment in the field when you made that discovery, or was there another moment that's really stuck with you?
Oh, good. I mean, there's
There's so many.
there's always things that stick in your mind. I mean, yes, seeing a hatchling echidna is one of amazing thing. I mean, other amazing things in my life, I went with a team of geologists in the field in
Mhm.
the Pyrenees in Spain, and they're all out looking for dinosaur eggshells and stuff like this. And I go for my walk up in this mountain someplace. I was just their cook. I went up to the mountain and I'm sitting there going through, sitting, looking at the beautiful view, going through all this rubble that I think is next to me, and I'm looking at, I'm thinking, shit, that's a dinosaur eggshell.
Oh, what?
And so here they are out in the field someplace looking for their dinosaur eggshells, and I find these beautiful dinosaur eggshells, and then I look at the rock behind me, and this rock
Yeah.
has been split, and you could see the outline of a dinosaur eggshell, and I thought,
Oh, wow.
"Oh, whoa." So that was, again, being at the right place at the right time, and,
Yeah.
yeah, some of those that's another sort of one of those moments in my life that I'll never
Mm.
forget.
Yeah.
But yes, the hatchling of an echidna egg, knowing how old well, knowing that the echidna was around at the same time as the dinosaurs where I had seen, the outline
Yeah.
of dinosaur eggs, that for me just sort of brought things together.
Yeah. No, that's amazing couple of things to witness, definitely. So getting back to your echidna research, what does a typical day look like in the life of an echidna? So if you're following around an echidna during the day, what are they doing?
Ah, um, that depends on the time of year, and that
Mhm.
depends on the echidna, if it's male or female, if it's a subadult, what they're doing. So right now, it's winter, and I am radio tracking some subadults,
Mhm.
ones that I actually hand reared last year that had been rescued, and they're doing very typical echidna things. They might sleep for 3 days. I think this one echidna, I'm calling it the fair weather echidna.
Mhm.
She will, as any rainy day, there's no way she's coming out of the burrow.
Oh, that
On
sounds like
sunny
the life.
days, she'll on sunny days, she comes out and basks. So they come out and they lay like flat as a pancake. They can
Mm.
raise those spines and let those sun rays sort of get into them.
Yeah.
And then they just take off and they go wandering and sniffing and flipping rocks and just sometimes looking like they're just having a bunch of fun.
Yeah.
And they'll move. Surprising how far they can move on those little legs very quickly.
Wow.
So if I'm radio tracking a couple times a day, I'll think, okay, I know where it was. And you go out and it's like, oh no, there's no signal. And
Mm.
you start walking, and the bloody thing has, taken off over the hill, of course, where you don't get a signal.
Mm.
So yeah, that can take up quite a bit of time. Otherwise, unfortunately, sort of a typical day is again like today. I might have been out radio tracking, but then I get an email or a phone call. There's an injured echidna.
Mm.
Can you come and get it? Well, I wasn't didn't even get that call until a little bit later. Somebody else went to rescue it. It was taken to the vet and it was too badly damaged. They had to euthanize it.
Mm.
So that then also comes to me
Yeah.
for taking samples with genetics lab that I'm working together with.
Yeah.
Not my favorite thing, but I would rather that we learn as much as we can if there are
Mm.
going to be, animals that don't survive. And then oftentimes I'll get an email. This is a very busy time for echidnas because the males, of course, are active. They're out there looking for females right now. It's the winter time, and they're the ones that unfortunately might get skittled on the road. So I get phone calls from wildlife carers from around Australia, and it's like, okay, this echidna came in. Here's the X-rays. What do you think? Can the beak be? Can the beak be? Can we put a splint on it? Can it be saved?
Yeah.
Um, those are all typical days.
Yeah. That's yeah, that's pretty remarkable. So you've got people calling you from all over the country that obviously know who you are in your research and you're able to help them through everything you've learned. That's a wonderful outcome, isn't it?
Well, it's amazing how resilient I think echidnas are as well. I think most of our wildlife is pretty more resilient than we let them sometimes be on their own. And
Yeah.
with echidnas too, because they are so different, because they have a very slow metabolism, because they have a much lower body temperature. Anything as far as medications and stuff has to be really, has to be very careful how things are
Mm.
done. But they heal really well.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of echidnas, years ago, echidnas with a broken beak would just be euthanized. But we know now, depending on where and how it's broken, that, they can heal themselves and continue quite a normal life.
Yeah. That's amazing they've got that good fight for survival and their body heals so well. Yeah.
Well, they've been
Um
around for a long time.
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's why they're tough little echidnas.
They're tough, they're survivors.
Mm, for sure. So what are some echidna behaviors you've observed that most Australians would never see?
I think most Australians have never seen an echidna train. Every time that I hear of somebody who's seen an echidna train, they're very excited.
Mm.
So an echidna train is only going to happen during the breeding season. So that could be June, July. or into August. And what happens is there's one female followed by any number of males. So it might be only two males, it might be five males. And only once in my entire life have I seen 10 where there were nine males behind one female. Yes, and that's only going to happen in the winter. So that's pretty darn special that, anyone who sees one of those, I love people who send me their photos of their echidna train. And I've had photos from all over Australia, from every state. So that's really, exciting to see. I think the other thing that people aren't normally going to see echidnas do is play. And echidnas really do play. Um, First of all,
That
I think one
surprises
thing
me. I
they
think I never would have thought of them as playful. I don't, and I guess I rarely see more than one echidna at a time, so it never really occurred to me that they play, but that would be cute to see.
Yes, well, they play by themselves, they are
Oh,
solitary living.
oh,
So,
okay.
and I think, and the way that we see things, of course, is when basically I live and work in the field with the echidnas. So, it's not something that I have to travel any place. I walk outside, I can take my transmitter and watch echidnas. But I think one thing that some people see, and I would call play, is that echidnas like to swim. So I get reports from people along the Great Ocean Road. They see an echidna out in the surf and they think, oh my goodness, we have to go save this echidna. So they go
Yeah.
out and get this echidna, bring it on land and, put it someplace safe and they stand there, watch it to make sure it's okay. And the next thing they know, the echidna has gone back out into the surf.
Oh,
So,
well, they just
so
got
we
to cool
see,
down, do they? And well, like you said, just
yeah.
because they enjoy it.
Yeah, just because they
Yeah.
enjoy it. I mean, even we have here on Kangaroo Island, I have farmers calling up saying, yeah, well, it is a hot day, and we've got all these dams out there. And I was watching this echidna, and it could easily have walked around the dam, but nope, nope, it went into the dam. It was just paddling all the way across, got to the other side, climbed out, decided it wanted to turn around and come back. So,
That's so
so
funny.
I guess if that's not play, I don't know what is. And the other thing we see is, of course they can sort of climb up logs and things like that, maybe when they're, foraging. But I've seen one sort of climb up on a log, walk to the end of it, look down, do a barrel roll, and sort of do a somersault off the end of the log, and then they turn around, climb back up, and do it again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they can be doing that time and time and time again. So I would call that play.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Yeah, and then my one little one here that I've been watching, I've got a lot of little, sort of there's a lot of ceramic people here on the island, so I have a lot of just little pots sitting outside along the walls,
Mm.
and we have a lot of kangaroos and a lot of possums. So one day I thought all of my pots were scattered everywhere. I thought, okay, well the kangaroos had a good time, whatever, last night. And then 2 days later, I put everything back. 2 days later, I'm in the house, I'm looking out the window, and there's this echidna with one of my sort of round pots, and it's taking it with its head and its beak, and it's rolling it around the yard, and then it's rolling it over rocks,
Like a
and then it
toy.
and then it really yeah, it takes its head and sort of knocks it to one side like a kid with a ball, "I'm finished with this, I don't want anything to do with it,"
Mm.
walks away, and within 30 seconds later, it turns around, goes back to it, and starts pushing it around again.
Isn't that cute? So even the, wild echidnas love a bit of enrichment and things to play with.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see them sometimes. We've seen echidnas actually walk over tiger snakes, and the tiger snake looks at the echidna looks at the tiger snake, and no further interaction.
Really?
Um, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. We watch them. We've seen them out with kangaroos, young kangaroos especially, very
Mm,
curious. And there's this echidna sort of doing its thing, and this young kangaroo getting closer and
mm,
closer to this echidna,
mm.
and maybe actually sticking its nose down on top of the echidna, and the spine's going whoop, and the kangaroo goes jumping backwards, and then the echidna goes, "Yeah, well, that was fun. Let's do it again."
Yeah, well, I guess the young kangaroo is sort of exploring the world, isn't it? And the echidna's probably seen them
Yeah,
all before. Oh,
yeah.
that would be
So
cute.
yeah, I think there's a lot of really um interesting things, they're not happening every day, and it's just being out there a lot that you get to see echidnas do really strange things. But
Yeah,
I think the swimming thing, a lot of people can have pictured that and
yeah.
visualize it if they haven't visualized it, seen it themselves. The last couple years when it was so hot, so many times, I've had people call up and say, "I've got this big bird bath," but the next thing I know, I've got this big echidna lying in it.
Yeah.
Or or, I've got
Yeah.
a water dish for my dog, and it's really large, and the next thing I know, there's this echidna actually sitting in it.
Yeah.
So,
Just a good way to cool down.
a
Um,
good way to cool down too,
I
yes.
wonder how far they can swim though, sort of wonder when obviously it's good if people know that they can swim because then you don't necessarily have to be alarmed. You can just watch them and see what they're doing. But I wonder if they ever, how far would be too far for an echidna to swim, I guess. It'd be
Well,
interesting
how
to
far they can swim, I think, when they're, as I say, playing in the surf or something like that, I think they're fine. I think when we have to pay attention as wildlife carers
mm,
is if there has been a big storm and the waterways are flooded and are
mm,
rushing very quickly. That's when, if there is an echidna in there, yes, they should be saved, definitely.
yeah. The other example I'm thinking of is my uncle recently told me that he was out in his boat on a dam, and by a dam I mean like those massive inland bodies of water where people do their water sports, and he said he saw an echidna swimming on the dam, and
Yep.
he wasn't too sure what to make of it, and I sort of wonder, how far that echidna swam if he sort of got to a point where he didn't know where he was going and he couldn't see land, and if he ended up drowning, or if he was just out doing a big swim and he knew exactly where he was going, that's a bit I would find that almost a bit alarming. I feel like I'd almost wanna rescue him if he was a bit too far from shore.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see that. If it is a very large area, as you say, and people are seeing it, then
Mm,
probably, if the echidna is rescued, that's probably a good thing too. I mean, if the echidna wants to go back in, it will.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's like there's sort of no harm done either way.
Yeah.
Well, if by rescuing it, definitely, yeah. So with the little baby echidnas, they're called a puggle. After all
Yes.
these years, do you still get excited when you find a new puggle? Are they something that you
Absolutely.
you don't see a lot of them, I suppose?
You you don't see, I mean, this is it. Since the females do not breed every year,
Mm,
and you're following a certain number of females. You don't know if one year there's only going to be two females breeding, or the next year there might be five females breeding.
mm,
So being able to follow through, if you see them actually mating, then when they have the egg, that's how it's taken years and years, of course, to actually get a good growth rate
mm,
from the puggles to know how they grow and when how long they stay in the pouch, how long then they're in the burrows.
mm.
It's taken years to actually put together the growth of an echidna from the time it's an egg until the time it becomes sexually mature.
Yeah.
But even the time it's an egg to the time that it goes into the burrow and the time that it leaves the burrow.
Mm.
So yeah, it's yes. So I'm always excited
Yeah.
when I see them, but being able having had the opportunity to look at echidnas over a long period of time, and we never hassled females,
Mm,
if we wanted growth rates, we
mm,
didn't use the same female all the time, all the time, all the
mm.
time, but we knew how old a puggle was, and it
Yeah.
didn't matter about the female. We would
Yeah.
look to see, okay, what is the growth rate of this animal? What does it weigh now?
Mm.
How does it compare with other things that we've now measured over the last, 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
So it's very, very long-term field research,
Yeah.
and yes, every time you get a puggle, no matter if it's a wee tiny one or if it's one ready to leave the pouch or if it's one that's already a burrow young,
Mm.
they are incredible,
Yeah.
and you can never, yeah, anyone who's ever hand reared, a lot of, carers who've hand reared will contact me as well because they are very special and they are very, very different. Mom doesn't come back. Once it's in the burrow, mom only comes back for 2 hours every 5 days.
Oh,
That again
wow.
was something that took a lot of time,
Mm.
watching animals once we found the nursery burrows to
Yeah.
find out what the mother was doing and what the young was doing. So
Yeah.
they are just so different.
Yeah. So before your research, there wasn't a lot that we knew about echidna breeding, which is what you were mentioning earlier with the man who discovered they had an egg, and then when you found a puggle in the pouch, it was the first time you'd seen that. So there wasn't a lot we knew. So essentially, what did we know before your research? We just knew that there was they laid an egg and that they had a puggle, or just that's all we knew, was it?
Well, we knew that they laid an egg, and it had, Mervyn, my mentor, had actually, found out that the egg is in the pouch for about 10 days before it hatches. Okay, so we knew that. That was
Yeah.
10 days before it hatches. He was the first one the first European, okay, the first European to actually weigh and measure. a tiny, tiny, tiny hatchling,
Mm.
and, found out that they're only about zero point 0.3 of a gram.
Wow.
So, how the
Tiny.
growth rate was after that was unknown. Yes, that's all that we found out. But the amazing thing, about the puggle, I mean, I always like to tell people, everyone knows, well, most Australians should know the Australian 5-cent coin.
Yes.
And the Australian 5-cent coin has an echidna on it. And that's about the same size as an echidna egg, the
Wow.
same diameter. But the amazing thing is that when you have a newly hatched echidna, a newly hatched puggle, it takes 8 newly hatched echidnas to weigh as much as a 5-cent coin.
Say that again? It takes 8.
It takes eight newly hatched echidnas, 8
Mm.
puggles,
Mm.
to weigh as much
Oh,
as a
I
5-cent
see.
coin.
Yeah, right, that's it. Gosh, that's so tiny, isn't it? They're so
So
light.
when yeah,
Yeah.
so I always tell people, take a 5-cent coin in your hand.
Mm.
Think of it as being an echidna egg, but
Mm.
it takes 8 newly hatched ones to weigh as much as that
Yeah.
5-cent coin.
Yeah. And then all your research after that, you've gone on to discover so many things, haven't you? Do you think you've basically sort of mapped the echidna breeding reproductive cycle now?
Yes, I think, yeah, we know pretty well what's happening. We know about the growth of the young. We know that, well, in an echidna population, they're large and small individuals. So they're not like kangaroos. So there's no sexual dimorphism. We don't have, big males and little females, but we have large and small males and females. They can only be 2.5 kilos and sexually mature. They might be 5 kilos and
Mm.
sexually mature. So size has nothing to do with age. It has nothing to do with gender. And that's what, a lot of people say, "Can I tell if it's a boy or a girl?" Well, no, because all genitals, of course, are internal. And
Mm.
looking at an echidna, turning it over, you cannot tell if it's a boy or a girl. And size has nothing to do with gender or age. And also, a lot of people think about, well, okay, what about the spur on the hind foot? Well, both echidna, male and female echidnas can retain the spur. Now, all young echidnas I've ever seen as puggles or sort of in the pouch or in the burrow, all of them have these spurs. Some of them will lose the spurs, and some of them will retain the spurs. So that's unlike a platypus, where
Mhm.
only the male
Mm.
platypus retain a spur.
Yeah.
That's connected to a venom gland, which it
Yeah.
is not in an echidna.
Right. So yeah, there's no way to tell. And then does that mean that how do you how do you tell their age then when you're going out
Ah.
and you're researching your echidnas? How do you know about them all? Do you have to do genetic testing or?
Well, no, how do you know the age? The age, even genetic testing, you're not gonna be able to tell the age. Age has been something following individuals basically from the time they hatch to
Oh,
the
okay.
time they become sexually mature. What we know is that the spur that they have, that all young echidnas have the spur, and the spur is covered by a spur sheath. So we found that they will retain the spur sheath on the spur and will lose that when they're between 3 and 4 years of age. So that is the only time we can say, okay, this echidna is, if I can say, oh, okay, well, if I know when it was hatched, then I can
Mm.
say, oh, yeah, I know it's 2 years old. But we know that, with the sheath on the spur, you can say, okay, all we can say is it's more than 4 years of age because there's no spur sheath, or we can
Mm.
say, okay, it's somewhere between 2 to 4 or 1 to 4 years of age. That is the only time you can age an echidna.
Yeah.
After that, let's just say they're ageless.
Wow, so that's why you said earlier that other echidna that lived for 40 or 50 years in that zoo before it got there, they didn't know how old it was.
Yeah, he lived for 50, he was 57 years in captivity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such an interesting fact. So yeah, you can't really age them if they don't have that spur and then if you
Yep.
don't have a history of knowing that echidna.
That's right. There is no way. I mean, there's people here on Kangaroo Island who have kept records
Mm.
of echidnas.
Mm.
And there was one when I first came that a friend of Mike's called up and said, "Look, I hear you want to see an echidna. We have one that's been on the farm for ages. It's been, we think it must be almost 50 years old." And it's like, oh, well, right. How do you know it's the same echidna? Oh, well, it's
Yeah,
written down in the book, in the
mm.
diary. But come and have a look. So we
Mm.
went and had a look. And they said, "No, this is why we know it's the same echidna. There it is. It had 3 legs."
Oh, that's a pretty defining feature.
Yeah. So it had the same 3 legs as what, the grandfather had written in the book as well.
Yeah.
So we knew that it was the same echidna that they were seeing for a very long time.
Yeah. Wow. And I guess they mustn't have many, like, say you did get to know echidnas on your place, if you tended to see a few around all the time. I don't know how you would know if there are a few, but are there any defining features? I mean, I know before you've mentioned that echidnas in different areas are different colors, but that probably doesn't really help if you don't travel. Like there's
Well, all
probably
I
no.
can say is about, yeah, the colors of echidnas on in Tasmania and Kangaroo Island, we have blondes, brunettes, and redheads.
Mhm.
Whereas on the mainland, generally echidnas are darker in color.
Right.
But every now and again, you will get, I mean, you can, in all populations, there have been albino echidnas found. So
Mm.
they really do have the pink eyes.
Mhm.
They have no coloration on their beak or their claws.
Mm.
Whereas we often have white echidnas, and Tasmania has plenty of white echidnas, but they are not albinos. They have dark eyes, they have dark coloration on the beak and dark coloration on the claws.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if people really get to know their echidnas,
Mm.
the coloration of the spines will look different, but I
Yeah.
think that's very, very difficult to discern if you've only seen a few echidnas.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's so
Yeah.
cool. I didn't even know about all the different colors that, they come in. I guess I'm just used to seeing the ones in New South Wales, but for when somewhere else like Tasmania, I might get a shock and be like, "Oh, it's a echidna of a different color."
Mm.
So even after all your research, there are still things we don't know about echidnas, right? What
Oh, absolutely.
what mysteries continue to fascinate you about them? And then if you could uncover the answer to just one question, what would be the thing that you really want to learn about them?
I would really like to know how they communicate because I'm sure they are communicating.
Mm.
Um, they because of the pads on their feet, they pick up low frequencies, and they are really a low frequency animal. So they have these mechanoreceptors in their feet that pick
Mhm.
up vibrations. They
Mhm.
pick up vibration through their beak as well, and that's how they find, I guess, most of their invertebrate prey.
Yeah.
Now, we've also seen echidnas. Sometimes, if I've been putting a transmitter on an echidna or doing something, we've had echidnas where the spines actually start to, let's say, vibrate. So you
Oh,
can
wow.
see the spines moving, and and it's like, oh, are these echidnas frightened? Well, I don't think echidnas frighten very much, but
Mm.
this happens, and I think that there's going to be a low frequency thing that that they are sensing and signaling to each other, because this is why they're solitary living. You can have them out foraging, in one area, and you see another one coming, and then all of a sudden they split. Like, why were they splitting? Did they know that each other was there? Because they only
Yeah.
get together during the breeding season. So
Yeah.
one time we had an echidna in, and she would often do this sort of vibrating things.
Mm.
So we had a wine glass where the bottom had broken off, and we stuck it in the ground and had water in it. And there was this echidna doing its vibration thing with its spines, and there were rings starting in the water,
Oh,
meaning that there was, of course, vibrations going out and actually starting this movement in the water, which was pretty incredible.
yeah.
But
That
how we're
does.
ever going to really measure it is going to be a question.
Yeah. Do you think that's something you're going to attempt yourself or
Well,
pass that off to your
let's put it
students?
this way. I think that's in the area of mechanical engineering and stuff like that.
Mm.
So people who work with really low frequencies and know how to address them and how to gather them, how to read them. I think it's going to be a thing probably for the future, but that's
Mm.
fine.
Mm. So
Yeah.
you might need somebody with, some cross-disciplinary expertise maybe
Yeah,
to mix it.
absolutely. There's
Yeah.
somebody out there who one day is going to answer that question for me.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting though. Who knew that echidnas could do that, vibrating their spines and then detecting the low frequencies? That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think, a lot of people are now starting, through in academia, that people are starting to do cross research, that we're having the mechanical engineers, we're having the genetic people, looking at, okay, to actually understand what they're finding about echidnas, they need to understand what the echidna is actually doing in the field.
Yeah.
And that's where, this research, this large research from all different areas is coming together.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be some
And the
really.
other thing is, of course, echidnas in the field, echidnas
Mm.
in the wild are always going to be reacting differently than if you try to put them in a captive situation.
Yeah, okay. So ideally, they do need to come out into the field and do it naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's always the best option.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, that could be interesting potential for future teams to collaborate and answer these questions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah. So moving on to echidna conservation, are echidna populations doing well in general? I know you said that they're located sort of all over Australia, but there's not necessarily a lot of them.
Well, this is, I think that is the big question. So the kangaroo island echidna has been EPBC listed as endangered, and as far as I'm concerned, all echidnas around Australia should be considered endangered because if Kangaroo
Wow.
Island is a good place with very, very few predators, then I think it's unfair when they list animals as, only threatened maybe, but there's so many animals and it's echidnas on the mainland where they do not have enough information. And so instead of saying um, insufficient data,
Mm.
and so we should put this animal on the endangered species list, they say, oh, well, they seem to be doing okay, so they're okay. And
Yeah.
there's no background behind that. And it's been even been said, the kangaroo island echidna is listed as endangered because we have 30 years plus of research from a population that we
Yes.
we know how long they live, when they die, what the predators are, all these different things. And that research has not been done on the mainland. But I don't think that is a good reason not to put them on the endangered species list. In fact, there are some areas in Australia where they know that locally echidnas have gone extinct. And I
Wow.
think that the big issue is that, we follow the young, and so they'll often leave their natal area and they will travel up to 40 kilometers to establish their own home range. So what is happening on the mainland? If you have an area where you have echidnas and they're
Mm.
going to live for 50 years, but what's going to happen to those young who are trying to go out and establish a home range? Where
Yeah.
are they going? Are they going to survive? So is it going to be in a few years, people are going out and saying, I used to see echidnas here. We haven't seen echidnas for the past 10 years, 20 years. Well, that's because nobody has been paying attention to what they've been doing.
Wow. And that's
So
pretty
that's
serious if you think they should be listed as endangered. I mean, that means their numbers are pretty deficient.
that's it. They are. We do know. Even here on Kangaroo Island, we know how many animals die. Not only we have fewer predators here, but
Mm.
what's the biggest threat to all of our wildlife? Loss of habitat
Mhm.
and vehicles.
Mhm.
So road strike. Road
Right.
strike is, yeah, and loss of habitat are the two greatest problems with keeping Australian wildlife safe.
Yeah. And are those threats of the habitat loss and the wildlife strike by cars, are they the concerns that concern you most about the future of echidnas, or is there anything else?
No, that concerns me the most because they're very resilient as far as disease and things. They're not one that they have a species specific tick that's not going to kill them. They're not susceptible to most diseases.
Mm.
Echidnas in the wild basically have very, very, very few parasites and endoparasites or any parasites. Most of the echidnas that have problems are echidnas that are in captivity, not the
Okay.
ones that are in the wild. Hmm.
Why is that? What are the problems they're having in captivity?
Oh, captivity is because okay, they're not in a natural habitat. They're usually not on natural substrate. They're not showing necessarily natural behavior because echidnas roam. Echidnas travel quite a bit, and sometimes they keep echidnas in groups, which of course is not natural in the wild. So it's the whole thing of you know stress and not
Yeah.
having natural food sources. And
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of zoos working on food sources and different diets even for captive echidnas because one of the biggest problems is gut problems then for animals in captivity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, it's not their natural habitat, and trying to replicate that is going to have its challenges and its impacts on the captive animals. So if the worst happened and echidnas did disappear, what would Australia lose, besides an
Yeah.
iconic species that's not found anywhere else? What would happen? What would
I think we wouldn't lose just echidnas because echidnas are cultivators and they are really important in our habitat. I mean, there was um, uh, one of the jobs we did with or one of the projects we did with Adelaide students who are worried about an endangered species of orchid. And you know how a lot of our native wild or native plants need mycorrhizae before they can actually form and um, reproduce and even grow. And the question was, do echidnas digging because they're digging and they're making pockets, where actually water can percolate and stuff like that. But are they carrying mycorrhizae? Are they because they're taking in a lot of soil? Are they carrying it on their fur, on their feet, in their scats? And yes, they are. So they are, they're transporting mycorrhizae for some of our native plants that are also endangered. So I think we would lose a lot more than just losing echidnas. We could lose a lot of different things in our habitat as far as native plants as well as one amazing animal.
Yeah, which tends to be the way, doesn't it? Like once you lose a species out of an ecosystem, it tends to have an effect because they're all linked and connected with
Yep.
the impacts that how they affect each other. But that's interesting what you say about the mycorrhizae because I never thought about echidnas impacting that. Like I just thought the mycorrhizae, was in the soil and it didn't necessarily
But
go
how does it?
through.
But how does it get from one place to another?
Yeah, I don't
How
know. I
you
guess
know
I
how?
thought it just spread or grew. It grew along. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, true. So how can
Well, also, but echidnas are also recyclers. When I'm saying, that they're cultivators, they
yeah,
they they're not just digging and helping to aerate the soil and stuff like that, but sometimes they're out there and they're tearing apart logs and things. So they're helping the recycling that's happening
yeah,
in the bush as
breaking it
well.
down.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, turning things over and keeping it going, yeah. So how can people help echidnas then if that's the case?
How can people help echidnas? I think, if you have an echidna in your backyard, keep your pet in. Don't
Yeah,
don't hassle the echidna.
yeah.
Echidnas come and go from some of the most strangest places,
Mm,
and people think, oh, this doesn't belong here. Maybe we should move it. But I think if people just respect the space where an echidna is and leave it do its own thing,
yeah.
um, don't try to, don't try to interact with an echidna, but
Mhm.
watch it
Mhm.
because you're going to have a much better experience watching it than trying to move it. Unless, of course, it's maybe off a road or something. But I think that what people can do is just tell other people what an amazing animal the echidna is, that it's one of the longest surviving mammals on the planet.
Mm.
And, when you get to see an echidna, you're seeing something very, very special. I think that's the message that every Australian should have in their head, which most don't. Most don't understand that it's, been around for 130 million years.
Yeah.
There's been a survivor, and they're still here,
Yeah,
and
it's
they're going to
incredible.
continue to survive. Mm.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it would be sad if after all that time, people came along and that was the end of echidnas. That's a very sad thought.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
it's been people impacted, of course, that have impacted, well, all of our wildlife, including the echidna. But
Yeah.
I think the main thing is respecting the habitat, respecting the animal, and just letting it do its own thing.
Yeah. And as far as their habitat goes, you said they sort of inhabit a lot of areas across Australia. So their habitat can be pretty broad in the areas that they would inhabit.
Absolutely. I mean, they're in desert areas, they're in the snowy mountains, they're in the rainforests,
Hmm.
they're on top of mountains, they're, way down other places, coastal areas, inland areas. They can be everywhere because they
Mm.
eat all types of invertebrates. They don't just eat ants and termites like many of the books say. They
Yeah.
eat all kinds of things. And I think that's another thing that people don't realize that, yeah, they're out there and they're helping actually the invertebrate life too by taking care of some of it.
Yeah. So if you were to take away echidna's habitat, what would that look like? Is that not necessarily tree clearing? Is that more specifically like more like development since they sort of can inhabit a lot of areas?
Yeah, well, development, of course, is always a big one because when you have development, what do you have? You have more traffic. You
Mm.
have more, you have more vehicle things happening.
Yeah.
You have building happenings. You have, echidna burrows. I mean, we've had nursery burrows destroyed when people are building and
Oh,
digging and doing things like that. So, yeah.
yeah, okay. So just to a closing question to sort of reflect back on all the work, all the wonderful work that you've done with studying these species, what do you think that the echidnas have taught you about nature and perhaps even life itself?
Hmm. To expect the unexpected.
Yeah.
to to go out and never expect to see what you saw the day before. but to take it all in and believe what you're looking at, to look and really see what's happening around you and to be part of it. Try Don't be separate of it, don't be afraid to immerse yourself and just let nature take you in
Mm.
instead of
That's
you taking nature in.
Yeah, that's lovely. You never know what you might see or notice.
Absolutely. Or hear. Listen and hear.
Yeah, that too. All the senses.
Yes. No, I mean, I love echidnas and being out there, the interactions of echidnas with other wildlife, such as the currawong. I always told volunteers, if you're out radio tracking echidnas or even looking for echidnas, and there's a currawong following you, that currawong may be looking for an echidna too, because I know that if the echidnas are digging, they'll feed for a few minutes and they just move on. That
Mm.
currawong will now come down and feed where the echidna was.
Oh, I
So
see. Mm.
currawongs were actually helping us find echidnas sometimes. And that's
Oh.
what nature taught me, is to don't just look at one thing, be aware of everything that's around you.
Yeah, there's signals for other things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome, Peggy. Oh, well, before we finish, I like to leave everybody with an actionable step that they can take away from the podcast, to help or do
Mhm.
anything that they can. Do you have an actionable step in mind that relates to what we talked to about that anybody could do?
What everyone can do is spread the word about how amazing echidnas are, how old they are, how it takes 8 newly hatched echidnas to weigh as much as a 5-cent coin. That usually blows people away, that
Yeah.
they've been around with the dinosaurs, that they're still around today, and we have them here in Australia, and they're not going to be anyplace else. So if you want to see them, you have to be here, and you have to be patient.
Awesome. That is definitely worth sharing.
Well, I always tell people, the more people who know about the echidna, the better the world would be.
Oh. Yeah, no, that would be so true. Oh, well, thanks so much for your time, Peggy, and for talking to us. I've really enjoyed our talk about echidnas, and I hope everybody listening has enjoyed it too. I found it quite quirky and enjoyable and fun learning about these little amazing animals.
It's been a joy to share this with everybody, and I hope that goes really well. Thank you.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Nature's Nexus podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some value in what was shared today. I look forward to presenting more knowledge and sharing ways we can connect to nature in future episodes, and hope you tune in with me to listen, learn, and act. Thank you, and until next time.